Listen closely, brothers, for my life's breath is all but spent. There shall come a time far from now when our chapter itself is dying, even as I am now dying, and our foes shall gather to destroy us. Then, my children, I shall listen for your call in whatever realm of death holds me. And come I shall, no matter what the laws of life and death forbid. At the end, I will be there for the final battle, for the wolf time.
The wait is finally over. Episode 10 of Heavy Metal Marines is finally here. In this video, you'll see how I paint a space wolf in a clean heavy metal style. We'll go over subtle battle damage, freehanding, wolf pelts, skin tones, and more. Let's get into it. The model we're painting today is a 13th Company Space Wolf, often referred to as the Wolf Brothers or Wolfenkind. They disappeared into the Eye of Terror during the Horus Heresy and re-emerged sometime later with extra benefits. The largest amount of Wolfen, the models you're seeing right now, are found in the 13th Company, a chaos-touched hybrid between Wolf and modified Superman. The Marines of the 13th Company also feature gray power armor instead of the classic desaturated blue that are often associated with Space Wolves. Additionally, this model was converted by an incredibly talented hobbyist who goes by the name of Valbjorn. He included chaos details like the shoulder and the dagger to illustrate the chaos-adjacent nature of the 13th Company. I should be a politician for these guys. Whoa, 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 stop the exterminatus. We're not chaos, we're chaos-adjacent. You do realize I have to kill you still, right? Bro, come on, don't be so lame. Valbjorn has an Instagram for you to follow that details all the insane conversions he does, and also he has a Patreon that teaches you how he converts his models if you're interested in doing the same. I'll have both of those items linked in the description below. Because the assembly process and basing was already done for me, the first step in this process was to prime the model, and I opted for gray. Let's get on to our first step, which is gonna be the power armor. I'll start off with a base coat of gray, and I get that by mixing two Citadel paints, Dawnstone and Administratum Gray. A pretty reasonable question at this point would be,
Scott, why are you mixing two grays to get a slightly different gray?
a lot of the paint plan for today's Marine was inspired by the wonderful work of Infernal Brush over at heavy-archive.com. Dave was a previous heavy metal painter, and he documented the actual paint plans for several box arts that he worked on and was familiar with. We'll be referencing the Burning of Prospero's Space Wolf box art for today's video, but also giving the model a unique spin as well. My primer color should closely match this gray color because I want to ensure that I'm getting full opacity with this paint, and it isn't some slightly darker or lighter version of my base coat. It'll become clearer why I chose to do this later on. Next, we'll be applying a soft shadow to the power armor with Eshin Gray. I thinned the paint pretty heavily with water and glazed it toward the bottom of the armor panels. If you need help with glazing, check out the video I've linked in the top right hand corner of the screen or in the description below. It takes too long to thoroughly describe each technique used by heavy metal, so if you're unfamiliar with any techniques, make sure to watch the longer, more descriptive video. You can see the difference between a side of the model that I applied this initial shading to and a side that has none at all. The change is pretty minimal, but that's kind of what heavy metal painting is all about. Slow, subtle, controlled painting. Depending on how thin your glaze is, you may end up applying this same shading layer 4 to 5 times or even more. Each time you do it, cover less and less area. This will hopefully result in a nice, smooth blend. If you discover that you are making mistakes, perhaps shading one armor panel a little bit too much, don't be afraid to come back in with that original base tone gray to clean things up. Apply the paint as a base coat to the top of the panel, clean your brush, and feather the still wet paint nicely into where the glazing started. This is why I took so much care to make sure my base coat was opaque. When I fix mistakes while painting the power armor, and I do that very often, I don't want it to seem like patchwork, but rather blend into that base coat seamlessly. Whoops, let's backtrack a little bit and do a step that I should have done earlier. Let's base coat everything that will be black, like the metal details, the rubbery looking joints in between the armor, and anything else you might want to be black, like the pouches on his waist or his belt. Better to do this now when we've invested less time in the armor as opposed to nicking light gray power armor with the black after hours of investment.
God damn it!
Next on the list is another soft shade like the previous, but with Rhinox hide mixed with Eshin gray in a 1-to-1 ratio. Brown is a color I wouldn't have thought of for shading a light gray Space Marine, but it totally works here. Not only is the paint very dark, so it works well to darken down the paint when mixed in, but also the brown hue gives the shadows a much more worn down feel. That is perfect for the 13th Company Space Wolves, as they tend to be more destitute than their other furry friends. It would make sense for the armor to be a little more grungy. The last shading step for our power armor is to do some recessed shading. I'll be mixing my Rhinox high with a little bit of contrast wildwood. I do this because it thins my paint, which helps it flow off my brush, similar to what water would do. Unlike water, however, it doesn't dilute my coverage as much, so I get a nice opaque paint with higher flow. Games Workshop seemingly sculpts their figures with this kind of step in mind. The new Primera Space Marines introduce tons of new panel lines that look great when enunciated in this way. If you need help with recessed shading, check out my tutorial linked below in the top right-hand corner of the screen. I made a lot of mistakes on this step and had to clean up the lines with my original base coat, so don't feel too bad if you have to do something similar. Now that our power armor isn't a simple gray base coat, however, fixing the problem is a little bit more challenging. I tend to have 2 to 3 puddles of gray paint on my wet palette during this step, and depending on where the error is, I'll use a suitable gray color for my corrections, whether it's light or dark. Patience is key when painting in this style. Fixing errors is almost a given, so don't worry when the issues arise. If you thought that was rough, boy do I have bad news for you. The next 3 steps are all edge highlighting.
Buckle up, Buttercup, it's about to get crispy in here.
With Administratum Gray, I apply my first edge highlight. This is going to be a thicker edge highlight so that future layers can exist inside of it. You'll notice how I apply multiple coats of paint to various edges. I'm doing that because with each pass, I apply more and more pressure. When I apply more pressure, the bristles of my brush wrap around the edge more and more, creating a thicker line. By doing multiple passes and slowly increasing the pressure, I can sneak up on the perfect line thickness. Of course, not every edge is exposed as nicely, and you'll often need to freeball it, and there are no clever tricks for that. The next edge highlight is a 1-to-1 mixture of Administratum Gray and Titanium White. The goal of this step is to paint a thinner line inside of your previous highlight. Sometimes running your brush along the edge perpendicularly isn't going to give you enough control to ensure that this highlight is thinner than the last. It all depends on how sharp the detail is. The sharper it is, the more this technique creates a thinner line. In this case, where your edges have a slight round over, which is very normal, painting the edges with the brush parallel to the edge versus perpendicular gives you more accuracy if you have the brush control for it. I know in most cases I often struggle with this. Lastly, with some pure white, I dot the very corners of various edges to add that extra bit of heavy metal sauce. In some cases, I extend this highlight further down an edge, but no edge has an entire highlight of white on the model. Use this color responsibly. Apparently, I am your mini painting mom.
Now you kids don't get in trouble with that titanium white. She's a nasty girl.
What am I doing with my hands? This is how grandmas hold their hands. They just kind of like, apparently are raptors. Raptor grandma. Ah! Now, let's do some weathering. I'm going to sparingly add some little chips and dings with Rhinox hide to the power armor. Now is when you should be asking,
Why? But Scott, why didn't we do this when we did the recessed shading?
because I hate myself. No, not exactly. That would have been more efficient. But heavy metal painting is so friggin' clean that even the weathering looks clean. In order to ensure that the whole end result looks right, I wanted to start the weathering process from a spot in the paint job that I knew was already in the ballpark. If I began weathering before even doing edge highlighting, it would be a lot harder to guarantee that clean look. It's mostly a mental well-being thing. Be very sparing with this step, a little bit goes a long way. With the chips added, we'll highlight beneath those dings and scratches with Administratum Gray to give them a cool 3D effect. This will be the last step in painting the power armor, which feels good because that process almost killed me, and basically over half the model is done being painted now. Hashtag Space Marines. And Necrons, and Tau, you get the idea. Before moving on to the next step, let's hear a brief word from our sponsor. Eldritch Foundry is a web-based character creator where you can craft and order epic custom miniatures. With hundreds of customizable options, you can craft the exact model you need, whether it's a dual-wielding cat-masked killer for you Fortnite lovers, or something more in keeping with traditional sci-fi, fantasy, or modern designs. Customize your lineage, gear up with unique weapons and spell effects, even mount a horse, war spider, and more. They have gear options for every single genre, and they're adding more all the time. Diverse lineages for humans in the form of new head options, arm amputations with multiple cut points and prosthetics, and 4 complete elemental sets mixable with any other ancestries. You can buy a model from them 3D printed at a layer height of 30 microns for $25, making them more affordable than other competitors' premium plastic options. All the footage of miniatures you're seeing in this ad are of models 3D built on Eldritch Foundry and printed by me. Any painted model pictures are of models printed by them, so you can get an idea of the quality to expect depending on what option you go for. Models you design are available in STL format for you to print, or physical format printed by them. If you have more of a constant need for miniatures, which I think is a problem we all have, let's be honest, they have a monthly subscription option that allows you to design and download as many figures as you can dream of month after month. With an annual plan, it costs only $10 a month, so you could seriously grow your closet of shame on the cheap if you wanted to. Thank you to Eldritch Foundry for sponsoring this episode. Now back to painting my space puppy. With the power armor done and looking suitably crispy, let's mess it up with some dodgy freehand. The space tools have various demarcations that imply things about the individual Marine. Doing a little research, I discovered that there were knee pad designs that notated Wolfen squads. While this guy isn't exactly Lucian from Underworlds, I still thought that the design was a good nod to the 13th Company. With an end goal of white, I started base coating the knee pad in pure administratum gray to get a lighter place to start from. From there, I mixed in more and more titanium white to build up my brightness on the top of the knee pad in a layering and feathering fashion. I placed the paint, clean my brush, and feather out the border of the still wet paint into the existing dry paint. Do this many times, as lighter paint takes a lot of help to build up opacity. It's worth noting that Heavy Metal would probably not paint in this style, instead opt for painting the knee pad near white, shade down from there, and add an edge highlight or two. But for this little knee pad, this approach that I'm showing is my preference. With the white established, it's time to begin our freehand, which is basically 2 askew triangles. I'll start with my midtone, which is corn red. The goal is to sneak up on your design. Don't try to nail it in the first brush strokes. Slowly increase the size of each triangle gradually until the placement, sharpness, and everything is to your liking. If you need more advice about freehand, check out my video on the subject. With the base red established, we'll now begin hiding with Mephiston red, and then a second sparing highlight with Evil Sun Scarlet on the edges of our design. With the highlights added, I'll glaze in some more Rhinox hide into the design to add some shading that matches the shading of the knee pad. With our design nice and crispy with sufficient contrast, I'll take some administratum gray and add in little chips and dings to the design to continue that weathered aesthetic of our 40K werewolf in London. Onto the shoulder pad. Similar to the red design on the knee pad, I'll base coat the shoulder in corn red, followed up with a back and forth application of Rhinox hide, applied as a nice soft shadow with the glazing method, and some highlights with Mephiston red using the layering and feathering method. On such a large, round surface, take your time to really go back and forth with all 3 colors to make sure you get a nice, smooth blend. The closer you get to your end result, the thinner and more sparse your application of paint should probably be. With my gradient established, I'll try to paint these 4 black spikes sneaking up on the final placement and design. You can see I'll make 1 to 2 fake passes with my brush, not applying any paint. I'm trying to barely graze the surface. I want thin little triangles that I can make larger and larger until they're equally spaced and sized. While the design for the knee pad made sense lore-wise, the design I'm picking for this right pauldron is more of an artful choice. I want to continue the theme of red and black instead of introducing another saturated color like yellow or some other you might find on typical Space Wolf sigils and runes. Just like with the knee pad, my last step is to take some Mephiston red and add in some scratches to the freehand. This has the added benefit of hiding some of our crimes if there are any. For his face, we'll start off with the base coat of Bugman's Glow. Let me just say that I am very bad at painting faces like Heavy Metal. I struggle to paint the skin like effectively power armor, when skin has much more organic shapes and subtle features. To discover some more of that subtlety, because it's kind of hard to see on a small part, I'll next apply a wash of Reikland Flesh Shade, mostly as a diagnostic step to see where my highlights should focus. On the faces where I'll try to find a hybrid approach between what I like about face painting and also the clean Heavy Metal style. I begin highlighting with Bugman's Glow. This character has very strong features on his brow, and initially my plan was to leave behind the shading in those creases, but I felt that even for a male character, it made those cracks stand out way too much. In my head, heavy metal painting does such a great job of getting out of the way of the sculpt to make the model stand out. I don't necessarily want to draw a lot of attention to my painting, but rather enunciate the cool model with a softer touch. I then mixed in Cadian flesh tone in a 1-to-1 ratio with Bugman's Glow, and again, highlighted the face, still not leaving behind much Bugman's Glow in those deep forehead creases and similar details. With some progress on the face made, I like to start the eyes now, so in case I make mistakes, I'm not messing up a ton of nice blending I worked on with the face. Using Rhinox Hide, I base coat the eyes. Don't be afraid to go a bit too big with this layer. We want to make sure we have every bit of space we can find for the next layers of paint. With some Administratum Gray, I base coat the eye again. I like to tap the eye with my brush to find where I should be painting, and then slowly apply more and more pressure with more taps, splaying the bristles of my brush out, increasing the size of each tap that I make. It's incredible how the slightest bit of extra pressure makes the eye bigger and bigger. The goal is to leave behind a little bit of that brown to outline the eye. With the white of the eye established, I'll take some black and dot on a pupil. When doing this, I like to approach the eye from the bottom with my brush, perpendicular to the eye instead of coming in at the side. This way, I take advantage of the tiny width of my brush to ensure I'm not covering up the majority of the white with my iris color. You'll notice that I switched to a smaller brush for this step. If you're curious about the brushes and other hobby tools that I use and recommend, you can find them linked in the description below. Again, these steps can be executed and also messed up within literal seconds, so don't feel bad about having to take a couple attempts. I definitely had to redo his right eye 1 or 2 times. With the eyes looking not too cross-eyed, I could progress with the face highlights now using pure Cadian flesh tone. I continue my highlight journey by mixing some Dorn Yellow into my Cadian flesh tone with a 1-to-2 ratio. Lastly, I do very small and sparing highlights, adding in a little bit of pure white into the previous layer's mixture. At this point, I glaze some warmth into the cheeks and temples and also a bit on the end of his nose, but not too much on the nose. For this step, I'm using corn red diluted with water. I figure he's in a pretty cold environment, so the flushing cheeks and nose makes sense. With that warmth added, I also added some purple to the lower eyelid using Nagaroth Night, also diluted with water. This is a classic heavy metal strategy that makes our warrior have a fatigued, war-torn look. Lastly, I clean up the upper cheek if I got any purple where it didn't belong with my final highlight color. If you find that the skin is looking a little bit too pale at any point, don't be afraid to come back in with Cadian Flesh Tone or Bugman's Glow or any mixture of those paints to introduce more of your midtone and also some saturation. Okay, you can start breathing again. We've now finished painting the smallest detail on the model. For Vikings, I love black and blonde hair. Maybe it's because I'm a hipster and orange and red is just too obvious. I began with the base coat of Hobgrot Hide, a nice ochre color. I then shaded with Agrax Urshade, which I immediately regretted and tried to wipe it away. It was far too dark a color to be a shadow for our eventual blonde hair. I attempted Seraphim Sepia off camera, but the new wash is really glossy, which I wasn't a fan of. I might avoid washing altogether for a situation like this. I began highlighting with Hobgrot Hide again, and while I do that, let me explain the situation we're dealing with. This hair is sculpted green stuff, which is different than GW's digitally sculpted hair. The hair of a typical GW model will have very small recesses and thick, admittedly not to scale, strands of hair. This means that when you apply a wash to this kind of sculpted detail, very little shadow collects in those tiny recesses, not obscuring too much of your midtone, which in this case is ochre. GW very intentionally sacrifices reality in small ways to aid the painting process, which is an art form when it comes to sculpting models in this scale, and they do it very well. Let me jump back into the painting process briefly. After my first highlight, I begin to mix Dorn Yellow into my Hobgrot Hide to get a brighter highlight for the hair. Okay, back to the extremely over-explained painting steps. With green stuff sculpted hair, those cracks and crevices are a little bit larger when compared to the digital sculptures, meaning more of that wash collects in the recesses, darkening more of the hair down. Obscuring more of my midtone means he'll end up looking more like a brunette after the wash. We also get into this weird scenario where if I start hiding on top of this, I'll end up with zero midtone because there's so little left behind after washing. I don't know about you guys, but zebra-striped hair is not what I'm after. Because of all of this, we have to adopt a more intentionally haphazard approach to hiding the hair. Think less of individual strands of sculpted green stuff and more about the general shape of the hair. You should be applying multiple layers of the exact same color during this layering process. Acrylic paint is naturally translucent, which is helpful. We can create subtle transitions by building up layers of the same color, getting closer and closer to an opaque layer of paint. I'll begin hiding with pure Dorn Yellow, and what I like to do sometimes with hair is paint a tiny bit of pure highlight and then immediately come back over it with a glaze of the previous layer. This creates a tiny hair strand sized blend with a nice little bright spot. Only until your very last layers of highlight should you be thinking about picking out individual strands of hair, like right now. After that's done, the hair should be complete. For the wolf pelts, I'll begin with a base coat of Rhinox hide mixed with Abaddon black in a 1:1 ratio. I'll then start hiding with Rhinox hide mixed with Hobgrot hide in a 2:1 ratio. I'll focus my efforts on the tops of the furs, but keep the lower parts dark. This is because I'm trying to emulate the natural variance you'll often see in animal furs. I'll mix more and more of that ochre color into my brown up to a 1:1 ratio and continue hiding in this same way. The same hiding methodology used on the hair is also used here, as the majority of these details are also conversions, so if you skip that section, make sure to listen to my diatribe on the difference between digital and physical sculpting. My thesis will be ready in Q3. Next, I'll mix in some Ushapti bone into this very same mixture of Hobgrot hide and Rhinox hide to get a lighter fur, and I'll paint this on the very tops of strands of hair. After that, I'll take some Nuln oil, undiluted, and apply it toward the bottom of the fur. This will shade the details subtly, but also darken down the surrounding colors, and yet again, emulate what an animal hide might look like. With a couple of layers of Nuln oil applied, I then take Eshin Gray and hide a couple strands that were darkened down. I don't want to go too bright with this, so don't apply too many layers of this Eshin Gray. Paint the eye sockets and claws of the pelt with Abaddon black, and we should be done with the furs. By the way, part of this painting process was done live on Twitch, and if you want to catch those streams, we're live on Tuesdays from 1 to 4 p.m. CST, but if you can't make that, there's a VOD channel and you can watch the VODs for that process as well. Both things linked down in the description below. All right, on to the next step. I always like having at least two kinds of metal on my figures. It helps to differentiate between the more ornamental stuff and the stuff used for killing those bitch-ass Rubicon Marines, am I right? See, I know things about Space Marines. I'll base coat the silver elements with a 1:1 mix of Abaddon Black and Lead Belcher, and the gold parts in Balthasar Gold. With those base coats looking nice and opaque, I'll apply a wash of Nuln Oil Gloss. I like how the glossiness of the wash not only allows it to sink into the recesses better, but it maintains the natural shine of the metallic paint as well. With the wash dried, I edge hide the silver parts with Stormhose Silver in a scratchy, weathered way. With Stormhose Silver loaded in my brush, I also dot all the rivets that Valbjorn lovingly placed on the model and also highlighted his inner joint tube things. Because so much of the model is already gray, I figure hiding with silver would be a nice way to have them stand out a bit. I've also seen FML take this approach before. For the gold, I applied a layer of Retributor Gold as an edge highlight on the smaller details like the rune on his belt, and a layer on larger details like the Chaosy shoulder pauldron. All right, just about done, on to the last step. For the base, we'll go for an obvious snowy environment. To help aid the cold feel, we'll layer the whole base with Thunderhawk Blue. I'll base coat other details minimally, as this will largely be covered up with snow, so don't fret too much about this. With the colors established, I'll wash the whole base in Drakenhof Nightshade, a nice blue shadow color. I'll apply a couple simple highlights, and now we're on to the fun step. I'll make a snowy mixture of golden light molding paste, Woodland Scenics soft snowflake, and some interference blue pigments for a little cold shimmer. With this mixture, I'll start to apply it onto the base where snow would naturally collect, avoiding deep parts with overhangs, but hitting edges that protrude even the slightest bit from the base. With the snow all placed, I finally airbrushed some Gulliman glaze around the edges of the base with my airbrush to create a transition from the outer edge of the base to the center. This really helps to nail the cold environment. With that complete, all we need is a nice crispy black base trim, and our F-Metal Space Wolf is finally complete. I am super happy with this collaboration with Valbjorn. With his immense conversion skills and my brush handiwork, we created something really special here, I think. I love how the red elements of the power armor break up the gray, and who doesn't like a good gray, black, red, and white scheme? It just works so nicely together. Make sure to check out Valbjorn's Instagram and Patreon linked below. Some of you may be wondering why this is the last Space Marine I'll ever paint. 7 years ago, when I started this series, I said I would paint 10 Marines because 10 Marines came in a tactical box that a wonderful viewer had purchased for me years ago. While I didn't use those exact Marines and instead opted for more exciting figures, I still felt committed to hitting that 10 mark. I realize now that the only time I ever paint a Space Marine is for this series or for commission work. Considering I don't do commission work anymore and this series is now done and dusted, I'm happy to be done painting Space Marines forever. I personally don't enjoy the models and furthermore don't enjoy painting in the style of heavy metal. I'd rather be inspired by the cleanliness of the team with my own paint style than try to mimic it entirely. I do realize that I could paint a Space Marine in my own style, but there are just so many other models that I'd rather paint in this world, and it feels good to go out on a bang. That's gonna do it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, there are 9 other in this series that you can find linked in a playlist below and also at the end of the video. Let me know what you guys think of the heavy metal series and if you're gonna be sad to see it go. If you like the channel and you wanna support it, there are many ways to do that. A lot of those things are linked down in the description below, namely a Patreon campaign that has a bunch of fun rewards, like a Discord server where you and I can hang out any day of the week and chat about your miniature painting projects, or which company in Space Host is the best company. You can also find my web store down there where you can pick up my merch like this sick cutting mat and other t-shirts and stuff like that. You can find hobby tools that I recommend down there, and those links are affiliate links. Whenever you buy using that stuff, I get a little kickback and no extra cost to you. You can also buy my model, the Duchess, and a course that I created that teaches you how to paint the model step by step. All things linked down in the description below. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint more minis!